Um, may, Maybe you'll say we'll see about that after this first one. Um, so you all can be the judge of that. But it's a pleasure, really a privilege to be invited to share and to share the word with you all this morning. Um, and so, just as a way of introduction, I have been thinking about our sense of smell and how it's so often connected to our memory. And just this week, I was smelling freshly cut green grass. And when I smell that freshly cut grass, um, instantly I think of spring and I think of baseball. I'm American, so I grew up in small town America. I grew up playing baseball. All of a sudden, I'm in my small town, and I'm probably about 17 or 18 years old, and I'm playing baseball on my high school team. Um, Occasionally, if we're driving around here, we'll get a sudden, just a bit of a smell of kind of dusty hay and straw, sometimes mixed with the smell of manure that is not always pleasant and pleasurable, but it's there. And when I smell that mixture, um, all of a sudden I'm working on the farm again, the farm that I worked on all through high school, and I'm either putting up bales of hay or I'm doing something around the farm. When I get the smell of freshly baked bread, uh, that mixture of flour, yeast, maybe a touch of sweetness, and especially when it's baking in the oven. It's Thanksgiving or it's Christmas for me, and my mouth is watering as I'm waiting for my mother's cinnamon rolls or these buns or the homemade bread that she would always make when I was growing up, and that she still makes around those special times. Those smells touch a part of my memory that transports me to those places, to those times, to those memories that I have. And experts say that the sense of smell is very likely the sense that is most closely connected to our memory. And there are physiological and psychological reasons for that. I'm not an expert. I'll just trust what the experts say there. And so today, we've already been introduced to the passage and to the concept, but today we're going to see how Jesus uses certain elements, certain smells to access the memory of his disciples, and one disciple in particular, to specifically go after the broken parts of him, to restore him and to renew and recommission him. And so if you're not yet in John 21, I invite you to go to John 21 with me. There's no PowerPoint. I'm just going to share with you from the word, um, and I'm going to share basically 7 observations that I see about Jesus as he takes us on this road to restoration with him. And so John 21 begins like this. Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, also known as the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out, got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. My first observation or reflection is this: Jesus lets Peter and the disciples just kind of wait and wander a little bit. This happens after the resurrection, when that first Easter Sunday morning. Jesus appears to the disciples in the upper room behind closed doors, behind locked doors. He freaks them out and says, peace be with you. And you got to see a little bit of the humor in Jesus' personality there. Um, Thomas wasn't there, so 8 days later, Jesus appears to them all again. This time, Thomas is there, and that's when he puts Jesus invites Thomas to put his fingers in the wounds, and Thomas in the end says, "My Lord and my God." After that, we don't know how much time goes by. We don't know if this is the next week or if this is the 2 or 3 or 4 weeks later, we don't know how much time has gone by. We don't know what Jesus has been up to, and they don't either. And so Peter says, "Well, I'm going fishing." Was it because that's where he did his best thinking? Was out in the fishing boat? Was it because the disciples needed to eat? And to eat, you've got to fish. And so they went out to fish. Was it Peter kind of returning to his old life in some way? Lots of people have postulated several, hypotheses about why. The truth is, we don't know why they're going. We just know that Peter says, "I'm going fishing." The other disciples say, "Great idea. We're going with you." So there they are. They're on the Lake of Galilee where they'd fished. Peter, James, John, and Andrew, they had fished there their whole lives. They'd been there so many other times, so many other nights they'd been there fishing. And this night, they come back empty handed. They come back empty netted, not a single fish in the nets. And so Jesus just lets Peter and the disciples kind of wait and wander a bit. And then we see that Jesus shows up, but he shows up unexpectedly. He shows up incognito. They don't know. They don't recognize that it's him. And it seems like uh, in his glorious resurrection body, he doesn't always look the same as he did before, and so they're not always sure if it's him. But Jesus shows up unexpectedly and incognito, and we begin to see a little bit of the personality of Jesus here as he asks a question. "Friends, haven't you any fish?" Now, I don't know if you've been around people who fish, or maybe you are people who fish. I'm not a fisherman myself, but anytime I see someone fishing, this is the typical question to ask. You caught anything? Are the fish biting? And that's what Jesus asks them. "Fish, friends, haven't you any fish?" And the disciples, they've been out there all night. They're tired. They're frustrated. They're disappointed. And so they all say, "No, we haven't caught anything." And then Jesus, and he at least has to be smirking at this point, trying to hide a smile. He says, "Well, throw the net on the right side of the boat. You'll find some." And when they hear this, it should have sounded familiar. Jesus initiates this conversation to take them back to the beginning, and especially for Peter to remember when he first really met Jesus. When Jesus gave him another miraculous catch of fish in Luke 5, he'd been fishing all night, came back empty handed, empty netted, and Jesus borrows his boat to finish teaching and then says, "Let's go out just a little farther. Go out into the deeper water, throw your net over the side, and you'll find the fish there." And Peter kind of reluctantly says, "Fine, you're a carpenter. I'm a fisherman. I know what I'm doing here." But he says, "Fine, if you say so, I'll do it." And Jesus gives him this miraculous catch of fish, and Peter falls to his knees before Jesus, realizing that he is in the presence of someone who is much greater than he thought. He says, "Go away from me, for I am a sinful man." And Jesus invites him to follow him for the first time. In all of this, Jesus is beginning to stir Peter's mind, his heart, his memory. And then John, the beloved disciple, says, "It's the Lord." And Peter, who it says he was fishing naked. Now that could seem really weird, very odd. I don't recommend doing it in these times, but back then that was actually kind of typical. You took your clothes off to go fish, to go work, and that sort of thing. So Peter gets himself halfway decently together and does his best impression of Michael Phelps and swims to shore. And then the rest of the disciples are left there to drag this huge, amazing catch of fish almost to the shore, just a little ways out. And when they get there, what is it that they see? They see a charcoal fire. Jesus already has a charcoal fire lit with fish and bread, all of it. But perhaps even more important than what they see is what they're smelling. All of a sudden, Peter is smelling the fire, that unique smell of the smoke from the charcoal. And most likely it's taking him back to that painful memory. It's back on the night of Jesus' arrest, Jesus' betrayal in John 18, just a few weeks before. And in John 18:17, Peter denies being Jesus' disciple. And then in the following verse, in John 18:18, it says, it was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm. Peter was standing with them, warming himself. And that word for fire is charcoal fire. These are the only two places that this word is found in the Gospel of John and in the New Testament. Jesus is showing us, John is trying to show us something here, that Jesus is up to something, that he is going after Peter's heart that is still full of the pain and the shame of his failure. And so Peter continues to smell this, and it's taking him back to the memory of his failure, of his denial. 3 denials of Jesus, of even knowing Jesus. And so they see that Jesus has this breakfast prepared. Jesus invites them to breakfast. It's a good Galilean breakfast of fish and bread. It was probably the Galilean lunch and supper too. And Jesus there in chapter 21, verse 12 says, come, have breakfast. Now, there's still, Jesus' appearance is still kind of hidden. They know it's him, but he's different, but they're kind of elbowing one another saying, don't ask, it's really him. Just don't go there. You'll embarrass yourself. And then in verse 13, it says that Jesus took the bread and the fish and he gave it to them. And they had to be asking themselves, this is so familiar. Where have we seen this before? Where have we experienced this before? And Jesus is taking them back, and particularly Peter, I think, back to another miracle, back to the feeding of the 5,000, where so many people had come out to the countryside to listen to Jesus teach and preach. And there's a great multitude of 5,000 men plus women and children. It's getting late in the day. And the disciples say, we can't send them away. You know, they'll faint on the way. Where can we get food for these people? And Jesus says, you feed them. And they go around, they look to see if they have anything. And they come back with 5 loaves and 2 fish, a boy's lunch. You know, that's not even enough for Peter to eat, much less 5,000 people. And then Jesus takes it and gives thanks for this bread, for this fish. And then where are the disciples? They're watching him. They're serving all the people. You know, part of their seminary training with Jesus was simply watching him and serving with him. And so as they're eating in John 21, no doubt they are remembering that long day of ministry with Jesus. And as they finish the meal, as they finish this breakfast, it seems like things are kind of settling down. Some are thinking about the fish and what to do with this great miraculous catch of 153 whoppers. Others are thinking about a nap, probably after being up all night fishing. And Jesus nods at Peter and says, come on a walk with me. And here's where he famously asks him these 3 questions. Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Now, what kind of question is this? Jesus is beginning to get back. He's been stirring Peter's memory. He's been trying to get him back to where something had gone wrong. And we're reminded of Simon Peter's confidence, maybe you could even say arrogance, at the Passover meal, where he said, you know, even if everyone else falls away, even if I have to die with you, Jesus, I will not leave you. And so Peter naturally answers, well, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And again, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Simon Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And then a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter is hurt because he realizes what Jesus is getting at, that he's going after this pain the pain of his denial, his sin, his failure, and almost certainly with tears in his eyes, he says, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And here's where we see that Jesus brings him quite directly to the point of pain 3 times. And he does it on purpose, not because he's cruel, but because he is trying to get to that failure. And it's interesting here that Jesus, he's not playing games. He doesn't let Peter play games. I know that you know that I messed up, and I know that you know that. So let's just kind of forget about that. Can't we be cool now? And Jesus doesn't just let it be swept away, swept under the rug. He doesn't make light of it. He takes this time, he sets the stage and takes him down this path to go face to face with his failure and the shame. Because of Peter, who has not faced his failure, who has not received the forgiveness, a Peter who has not dealt with the pain and the shame and the wounding of that failure, a Peter who is not whole, is not going to be the leader that Jesus wants him to be. He's not going to be the leader that Jesus needs him to be. And so as Jesus restores Peter, it's interesting. He doesn't just say, okay, now we're good. So go home and relax, go back to fishing, do what you want to do, kick up your feet and relax, watch the Champions League, just chill out. No, as Jesus restores Peter, he renews his calling and his mission for him. First, he says, Peter, feed my lambs. And he says, take care of my sheep. And the third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? You know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus says, then feed my sheep. And then after that, he warns Peter. He says, yes, I'm calling you to this, but this calling, it comes with a price. When you were young, you dressed yourself, you went where you wanted to go. But when you are old, others will dress you and they will take you where you do not want to go. This calling will come with a price. And with Peter, we see in Acts, we love the Peter of Acts. In the church leaders, as Christians, as just Christians, we love watching Peter in that first half of Acts. From Acts chapter 2 and on, he's bold, he's dynamic, he's a charismatic leader, he's daring, he's willing to suffer for Jesus. In Acts chapter 4, chapter 5, he and John are actually laughing with joy that they've been counted worthy to suffer for Jesus. Peter's not perfect yet, but wow, it's exciting to watch him in the book of Acts. But here's the truth. We don't get the Peter in Acts without this conversation in John 21. Jesus takes him back to heal and restore him from his failure and his weakness and his wounding in order to renew the mission and the calling that he has for Peter. So let me just ask a question, kind of a reflection application question. How are you feeling disqualified from ministry? How are you feeling disqualified from the church or from the kingdom in some way? Because no doubt, like Peter was still dragging this disqualification from his failure, from his fear, his wounding. Maybe it's for you, it's something along the same lines. There's some failure that you've not fully dealt with, some sin in your past, maybe some wounding or something else that you've not fully and deeply dealt with. Jesus longs to forgive you, to heal you, to restore you. And yes, it probably will be painful as it was for Peter, but let me say it again. If I had a Twitter account and I were, doing hashtags, this would be hashtag you don't get Acts 2 Peter without John 21 Peter. And what I mean by that is that Jesus, just like with Peter and the disciples, Jesus may allow you to wander and to wait for a little bit. Jesus may take you back to the point of pain, and it may be this whole process that Jesus has prepared, just like this morning. It's a setup. Jesus knows where he's taking Peter, and he takes him there little by little, reminding him with each action, with the smells. He's taking him back until he gets to those questions when he can point to that point of pain, that point of failure, that point of wounding. But he's doing it all to heal, to restore, to commission and to recommission Peter. He will do that to heal and restore and commission or recommission you. As we finish the passage, and just as I reflect on my own nature, I see that there's a temptation here. There's a temptation to think this is great stuff, but it's great stuff, especially for Edgar. Man, this would be great for him to hear. This would be great for her to hear. And you have someone else in mind that maybe this would be great for them to hear, and that may be the case. But we see Peter here. He kind of does the same thing. He kind of deflects. It's been an intense conversation, and Peter kind of deflects and diverts the attention here from himself. He says, "Well, what about John? What about him?" And Jesus just very directly says, "What's that to you? That's not your story. You don't worry about that. Peter, you follow me." And I think Jesus is saying that to you and to all of us now. He may be stirring up memories. He may be stirring up failures. He may be stirring up pain and wounds that sometimes we would rather not deal with, but he's doing it to heal and restore. So let me encourage you, don't deflect, don't distract from what Jesus is doing. Follow him into it so that you can deal with it. You can deal with it head on. You can experience. That's really the only way to experience the deep, deep restoration that only Jesus gives. And nowhere, that deep restoration isn't available anywhere else. And you may experience in a time of prayer, but you also may experience through a time of counseling. You may need to find someone who has experience in inner healing prayer, or maybe just conversation and support and fellowship with healthy, mature, trusted Christian friends to begin to go into that and experience the forgiveness, the healing, the restoration that Jesus is offering to you. So I said I would share a little bit about myself. We just moved here last summer after 10 years of pioneer church planting in a town in Castellon. And when I say pioneer church planting, that means there wasn't another evangelical church in the town, and so we were pioneering it. We were figuring out how to do it as we did it. But as God ended our time there, and then we moved here, and I had enough distance on the situation. The different situations also began to reflect kind of on the state of my heart. I realized a few things. Number one, when people started talking about church planting, let's go out and start churches, I could not talk about, there was this emotional bodily reaction just to the words church planting in English or Spanish that I wasn't expecting it. It just happened. I couldn't talk about church planting. The second thing that I realized was that Jesus a couple years ago revealed to me that I'd been harboring some bitterness against people. And as we moved here and I had some distance on those relationships from people in the church, people I was working with, I realized that I'd not fully and deeply released all of that bitterness. I wasn't even sure how to. I just knew it was there. And the third thing, just generally, I didn't realize how empty I was, how much I was in need of healing and restoration. And so I was talking this over with my wife, with Rachel, and several times we kind of filtered back through it. We went through it, And she said, well, maybe it'd be a good idea for you to talk with a counselor about this, or some sort of debriefer that could help you kind of organize and heal some of these memories, these experiences. Um, and I thought, well, I would recommend counseling for other people, but for me to actually submit myself to that, I'm a guy. I don't want to talk about my junk with other people. Uh, but in the end, as she usually is, she was right, and she had someone in mind. She knew a counselor who works with cross cultural missionaries here in Europe, and so she connected me with him. And I did about 4 sessions. I did 4 sessions, about 8 hours, reviewing the previous decade, 10 or 11 years that we had been doing. And so as we reached the end of our time of those 4 sessions, I thought, wow, this has been good. It's been helpful to review these things. Um, but we had about 20 or 30 minutes left in the last session, and the counselor said, well, how about we spend the last 20 minutes just praying together and see what Jesus would like to do or say in this time? And I thought, well, prayer is good. Sure, let's do it. And so he just allowed me to pray however I wanted to, out loud or silently. And I began just confessing the bitterness that I'd been harboring against specific people from specific situations. Uh, Invited him to come in and prune those things, to root them out, to clean that out of my heart. Confessed my emptiness before him. And then I was just quiet. I said what I needed to say, and I was just quiet. Um, and then I don't want to exaggerate, and I don't want you to think that I'm super spiritual or anything like that. But as I was there just quietly in Jesus' presence, uh, I felt him filling, I could physically feel my heart, my chest being filled up again. I don't know how else to explain it other and what I heard him say was clear and specific to my heart, not audibly, but to my heart. And he said, BJ, I'm making you whole and wholehearted so that you can help others to be healed and wholehearted as well. And so the forgiveness, the cleansing, the healing, the restoration he had for me also came with a mission that he had already started for me. And that's really what I'm beginning to do, as I'm working with men as a part of a movement called Wild at Heart, really just helping men to find healing, wholeness, becoming wholehearted again, so that they can follow him passionately, follow Jesus passionately into the mission that he has for them as a part of his kingdom. I shared all of this so I could ask you just a couple questions. How do you need to experience forgiveness and healing and restoration today? And secondly, what might Jesus be calling you to, inviting you to on the other side of that restoration? I don't know time-wise how we are, Edgar, but could I do just one last thing, about 3 minutes? If we're short on time, it's not a big deal. We'll go for it. I just would like to invite you. We've heard the word. I would like for us to hear it again. And so I'm just going to read this passage again, but slowly, quietly, meditatively. And so if you've been taking notes or making your shopping list, we're just going to quiet ourselves and we're going to invite Jesus just to speak to us and ask you to consider a couple of questions to ask Jesus as we just go back through this passage. Number one, Jesus, where am I in this passage? And number two, Jesus, what do you want to say to me? And so you may want to close your eyes as we do this, and take a deep breath. Why don't we just take a deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth? Jesus, where am I? And what do you want to say to me now? Afterward, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter told them. And they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat. But that night, they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed him in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals with the fish on it, and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared to ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread, and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you truly love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. Jesus, thank you for your word and for your desire, your longing to forgive, to heal, and restore us. Continue that work in us. Continue that work among us as your people. Continue that work through us. For it's in your name that we pray, Jesus. Amen.